is Paul Jansen. You would have seen me in that introduction video. And I manage Turner Hopkins Immigration Specialists, which is a division within Turner Hopkins that provides very much specific immigration advice and assistance to people coming to New Zealand. That's why you're all here. So we're going to have a bit of a longish session. I'm going to try and keep it to about 45 minutes if I can. And what we're going to do is talk through, as you'll see hopefully on the screen, an overview of the visa system in New Zealand. So let's give you a little bit of an introduction to how the New Zealand visa system works. We'll then look at the different visa types and categories of visas. So we'll be talking about temporary visas and the different classes of resident visas. So first off, you'll understand how the visa system works. Then we'll look at the individual visas that you can secure. And then we're going to dive into the main focus of the event or the seminar, which is really about the skilled migrant category. And the skilled migrant category is where we get the vast majority of our immigration approvals through. So roughly 70% of our resident visa approvals come through that skilled migrant category. And it's probably where most of you who are joining now, I can still see people coming through, where most of you will end up. It is very much an employment-focused visa category, and that is a big part of what we'll talk through. And we'll go through the different options. There are, in fact, 5 different skilled migrant pathways. Really only 3 of them apply to people that I deal with. So we'll dive into that a bit. We'll break that up and have a look at how all that operates. We do have a question and answer session at the end as well. So if you do have a question, pop it into the chat. And then at the end of the seminar, I will go through those questions and try and answer as many of them as I can, depending on how many there are, of course. Really important, though, to understand or to maybe refine your question to be reasonably generic, because if you ask me here and now, do you qualify to make the move? I can't really answer that. We have approved you to join the event simply based on what you've told us in the registration form. So we believe that there is potentially an option for you, but I cannot dig that much deeper for people on this event. And this event is not designed to tell you whether you qualify specifically, or rather how you might qualify. It's designed to give you a very general overview as to how the system works. If you, having listened to me today, decide, yes, this sounds like something that you could do or that you want to pursue further, then we have a one-to-one consultation process where I do spend an hour with you individually. And we actually talk through what your situation might look like, how you might qualify, and what options might exist for you. So that consultation process is your opportunity to take, I guess, the next step and to have a look at the options for you, particular visas that you might apply for, but not just the visa process. We spend quite a bit of time talking about the relocation as well, what it means to actually migrate. And that's a bit of a bigger question, I guess, than just the visas. Visas are important, obviously. That's what I do and have done for over 20 years now. But actually understanding what's involved in the move is also really, really key. So I'm just going to switch the video off for me. You've all seen my face and that what I look like, which not the best at 7 o'clock in the morning, and having to, where I live is about an hour away from my office, so a very early start for me. I'm going to switch that off and so you can all focus, I guess, on the PowerPoint itself. So before we dive into the overview of the visa system, I also did want to talk a little bit about New Zealand, because that's where you're moving to. And, it is a fantastic country. It's a great place, but it's not perfect. And I think the advice that I like to offer to my clients and to those considering the move is that if you're looking for perfection, you're not going to find it in New Zealand. If you're looking for somewhere that is progressive, that offers fantastic lifestyle opportunities, good employment opportunities, and potentially a country where your children can grow, be educated, and have the same opportunities, then New Zealand is a really good choice. But you have to understand that it comes with its own issues, that settling in here is not a straightforward process. And generally, you tend to go through lots of ups and downs as you make the move. I often counsel people who are trying to escape somewhere, so they've decided where they are is no good, and they want to move to somewhere that's going to be, sort of, I guess the honeymoon version of life. They want to live somewhere where everything works and everything is perfect. And New Zealand was almost that, but it isn't. It isn't perfect, and you will find there are some challenges along the way. So just be, I guess, as a migrant, be prepared for those challenges. And if you are prepared, often the move goes a little better for you. We do a lot of that with our clients. It's about keeping it, I guess, keeping it real and realistic, and making sure they understand that those challenges will surface, and that they will at some point stop and wonder, did they do the right thing? Have they made the right move? And that's all perfectly very normal. So understanding all that, I think makes for a better and more successful move. But when we do the one-to-one consultations with people, we do go into that in a little bit more detail for their individual situation. Also, I would, I guess, suggest that at the moment, New Zealand is coming out of very slowly a recession. Our recessions tend to be quite shallow, so we don't tend to sort of fall into that recessionary trap too much. The job market here is a lot softer, though. Post-COVID, we had a massive rush of migrants coming in, about 140,000 approvals for temporary visas, which in a country of only 5 million people is a lot. And then the labour market cooled off, as most countries have struggled with that post-COVID sort of sugar rush of all the money being pumped into the economies to keep things going. And we're weaning ourselves off that. In the last 6 to 12 months, we've seen a lot more interest from employers. They're popping up and starting to understand that that shortage that New Zealand tends to suffer from, that labour market shortage, is on the horizon again. And so I suspect we'll see more and more employers gearing up towards the middle or end of this year to really start looking at offshore hiring with more vigor, more gusto, I think. So there is going to be a bit of a pickup. And our biggest issue in New Zealand is that up and down of people that we need. We go through cycles where we don't need so many people, and then suddenly we need everyone. There are some occupations where we always need people: healthcare, teaching, IT, engineering, and we'll talk about some of those occupations a bit further on. So if you are in one of those particular occupations, New Zealand has always got opportunities. But we also welcome people across a whole range of other occupations and jobs, and the demand for those does go up and down a little. So when we do have a one-to-one consultation, we tend to look at your particular occupation, what the market looks like, and give some advice around the timing of your move, because that's really important. But that's just a little bit of an overview. I could talk for easily for an hour or two just on New Zealand itself, but you're here to find out about visas, so we'll get into that. So as a very kind of basic outline, New Zealand offers a very structured visa system, and it's why we have a good quality of migrant coming across the border, because we are quite selective. We have some very clear, well, they're reasonably clear rules if you compare them to many other countries. And the whole design of the system is to bring in two types of migrants. So we have temporary visa holders, and we have those who come here to stay permanently, and we call those resident visa holders. Temporary visa holders may be coming in for a number of different reasons. They could be coming to visit, see family, to be a tourist, to study here as an international student, to work. There's a whole range of different temporary visas that facilitate different things. And then we have our resident visa categories, which are allowing, or which do allow, people to live in New Zealand forever. Now, quite often, and as you might discover as we talk through some of these categories for residents, you might have to do both. You might have to start with a temporary visa that then eventually leads you on to a resident visa. And that is, for probably the vast majority of our skilled migrants, the process that they will follow. So we go through not just one, but maybe two, and sometimes even three different visas to get you to the end goal. But the end goal is always for us to be able to keep you here permanently. And ultimately, that's what people want, is they want to make the move and be able to stay. So we'll go through that a little bit more when we talk about the skilled migrant process, because that's really where the multiple visas comes into play. One really interesting and I guess unique thing about our New Zealand permanent residence process is that once you secure permanent residence, it's indefinite. A lot of countries have a process where you get residence, you have to renew it every few years. You might have to remain employed or have some ties to the country or prove something over that period. What New Zealand does is we give you residence up front, once you're approved, and then we have a 2-year commitment period where we say we'll do one of 5 different things in that 2 years, and usually it's just be in the country for a certain period of time, which most people are because they're working here and they're settling in. Once they've done that, at the end of the 2 years, we give you another resident visa, which is pretty much exactly the same, all the same rights and privileges and benefits. But that resident visa never expires. You could leave New Zealand for 10 years, come back, and it's a welcome home. And that's very rare because most countries don't operate that kind of process. So for a lot of clients, it's a very attractive thing because we're giving you the right to live here permanently and indefinitely without any strings attached. You can obviously move on to citizenship at some point. That's a very different process that takes 5 years of being a resident. It is actually not administered by the same department. It's run by a completely different government department and has different rules and requirements, but that is certainly an option for a lot of people, depending on where they're coming from. We offer 3 main streams for resident visas, which we're going to go through in a bit more detail, but primarily what we're trying to do in New Zealand is find skills, so good skilled migrants that can bring their skills to New Zealand, that can support employers, that can grow businesses, that can generate tax income, and that can train people. So skills is our big focus. Second one is investment, so people bringing money into the country, which we will then use and invest and grow businesses and build the economy. And then the third one is family, so supporting people who might have a New Zealand partner, people who are coming as parents or dependent children. So we kind of touched the 3 main points of our society and our economy through the 3 different visas for residents that we offer. Temporary visas have a much greater pool of visas, but they're pretty much broken down into also 3 paths. So visitors, which come in a variety of different flavours. Students, primarily coming to study here as international students, which is a big industry for New Zealand because they are paying the full international fee rate. And then workers, people coming to do a job, and they may be coming for 1 year, 2 years, or up to 5 years to work in a role that supports a New Zealand employer who cannot find those skills locally. And a lot of people who come here as workers then transition to residents, but not all of them do. And I think one of the really important things, and it's a bit of a trap for a lot of people who go online and any number of Facebook groups where they'll say, oh, come to New Zealand, get a job, and everything will work itself out. Actually, that's not the case. And I warn people against that sort of thinking because getting a work visa and getting a job here may or may not lead you to residence. So understanding if it will is a really good first step. Knowing that if you get the job and the work visa, you do have a path to residence is really important. Otherwise, you'll end up here on a work visa and then have to go home. And for most people, that's not what they want. As I said at the beginning, skilled migrants do make up the bulk of our resident visa approvals, the vast majority of them, and they come in 5 different varieties, which we'll touch on. And understanding how you qualify for residence often involves looking at different visa options. So, excuse me, different visas all tied together in a kind of a daisy chain. So to give you a really simple example of how that might work, you might be a qualified accountant with a degree and lots of good experience, and you're keen on pursuing New Zealand. So your first step might be to come to New Zealand as a tourist, as a visitor, to look for work. And it is not illegal to do that. So there's a lot of myths and rumours about that. You can come to New Zealand as a tourist and seek out employment. How you apply for that visa and what you say to immigration is very important and something you need to be very careful with, but it is something you can do. So that's your first visa, is a tourist visa, simply to get you here to make you more employable. And the simple fact is being in New Zealand will make you more employable. If you're sitting offshore trying to find a job in New Zealand would be the same as me sitting in New Zealand trying to find a job in the UK. It's going to be a struggle because employers cannot see how committed or serious I am. They cannot talk to me on their time frame. It is just logistically more challenging. So coming to New Zealand to find work is something that we recommend where people can do it. Not everyone can, but assuming you have the ability to do that, then you would travel here on a tourist visa, find the job offer. Once the offer is secured, you would then move on to a work visa. You don't have to leave New Zealand to do that. You can transition from one to the other. And then that work visa will potentially, if we've done the right assessment for you and you've got the right profile, lead on to residence in either 1, 2, or 3 years, depending on what your situation and profile looks like. So then, in fact, your process to get to residence was not just one visa, but was in fact three. Some people can qualify directly for residence, and again, we'll talk through what that looks like when we get to the skilled migrant category. But for the vast majority, there will be a combination required, a combination of visas required to make this work. Okay, so in terms of temporary visas, we'll go through those reasonably quickly. And then we're going to dive into more detail on the resident side of things, which is really why people are here. And remember, if you have questions as we go through, please pop them into the chat, and so I can curate all those at the end. In terms of temporary visas, we'll start with visitor visas, and they cover a variety of different things, mostly for people to come here, have a holiday, visit family, travel around, and then leave. But some people do, and it is entirely possible to use this or to facilitate a job search using that visitor visa. You cannot work while you're on a visitor visa, that's fairly obvious, but you can be here attending interviews, talking to employers, and canvassing the market with your skills to try and find that job offer. Generally, they're issued for between 3 and 6 months at a time, depending on where you come from and what you're coming here for, and often multiple entry, allowing you to come and go. Work visas is the next one. That's a fairly big chunk of our temporary visas. We get a lot of people coming here on work visas just temporarily. And again, some of those will transition to residence, but not all of them. And work visas have a 3-step process now. They never used to, but they do. And it's all based on employers being accredited with Immigration New Zealand. So if you're out there researching the visa process, you probably will come across the term accredited employer work visa. And what that means is that in order for an employer in New Zealand to recruit a migrant, they have to become accredited first, which essentially means they go to immigration, and immigration checks that they are a viable, genuine business that will look after the applicants or any work visa holders that they have. So that's step number one. And at the moment, there are over 30,000 accredited employers. There's a very large pool of them. And securing accreditation for a well-established company is not a difficult or onerous process. So often people, when they start the job search, they focus on the accredited employers, which is normal and makes sense. But in fact, what I say is just apply to anyone and everyone, because if you come across a really good job with an employer that is not accredited, we can potentially secure that accreditation for them reasonably quickly. Once they've done the accreditation, then, and if they wish to hire a migrant, they do a job check. And a job check is where they take the job that they're trying to fill and give it to immigration, providing evidence that they have tried to fill the role locally. That doesn't apply to every job. So if you're a teacher, for example, or a nurse or an engineer or an IT professional, they don't have to prove there's a shortage. The government already knows there is. And so in those roles, the job check is just basically a check of the agreement, that the terms are correct, that the pay is fair, that everything looks in order. Once that's approved, then the employer can invite the applicant to apply for the work visa. And the work visa process is now much simpler because all of the other stuff has been done. Job has been checked, the employer has been checked, so we are onto the work visa. And this work visa system replaces what was previous to this 6 different work visas. They've all been squashed into one. Most work visas for those who are in good skilled occupations are issued for 5 years. And here's the really important part though. Once you've done your 5 years, you must leave the country for 1 year before you can come back. Unless, of course, you qualify for residence. If you qualify for residence, which is the goal, then you'll generally get that resident visa within that 5-year visa. We then have student visas. Student visas are used for people to come here and study as an international student, meaning you're paying the full international fee rate for that course. That can be pretty expensive. Not impossible, but what we tend to find is that the student visa pathway is often very heavily sold overseas as a pathway to residence, but it isn't always a pathway to residence. So a really good scenario or comparison to give you is someone I spoke to a few weeks ago who was an engineer and was looking to come here and find work, and had been told by an overseas agent that the best way to do that was to spend about $30,000 on a master's degree, come to New Zealand, study, get a work visa at the end of it, and then off you go. And my response was, yes, but you still need to get the job at the end of it. You've spent $30,000 or more to get an open work visa to find the job. You could spend a fraction of that $30,000 to come here on a visitor visa, look for a job, and go directly to a work visa, which is what they're going to do. So, student visas are good if you want to come and study here and have the money to do so, but not the magic answer to a pathway to residence, as some people might present it if you're talking to them overseas. Big thing with all temporary visas, so visitors, work visas, and student visas, are they're time limited, hence the word temporary visas. They are only valid for a specific period of time, ranging from a few months to a few years, and they're all conditional. That means they have a condition attached to them. So if you're on a work visa, that would generally mean you are approved to work for a specific employer in a specific role in a specific location. Residence is very different because it allows you to work anywhere, doing anything for anyone. So it's quite a different system. But the temporary visas are, by their very name, temporary in nature. They're not designed to keep you here permanently, but they often are the stepping stone to being able to keep you here permanently. When we look at resident visas, and just a sort of really brief overview of the main categories before we step into the skilled migrant category in more detail. So, as I mentioned in the introduction, we have three main streams of visas that we're dealing with for residents. So, there's the skills aspect, there's the investor and business visa, and then the family based visas. In terms of the skilled visa pathway, there are five options. I know there's only four bullet points there, but if I clarify that, so we have a green list, and those of you doing your research might have come across that term before. The green list is a list of occupations that the government has identified as being in demand. So essentially, we know that we need these people, and so we make it slightly easier for them to qualify in one of two ways. So either they can apply directly for residence, or they can have a work to residence pathway. There's no points involved in that process. It's literally about the job, meeting the requirements for that occupation, because every occupation on that list has specific requirements, and meeting the basic criteria for residence. And the basic criteria for residence are that you are under 56 years of age. So you have until 55 years, 11 months, 3 weeks, and 6 days to apply. If you applied on that last day and you turn 56, that's fine, because time stops when your residence application has been lodged. Not for you, you get older, but as far as immigration is concerned, you will always be 1 day short of 56, so that's okay. You need to speak English, and we do have English testing for certain people, or exemptions if you come from specific countries, and meet health and character requirements as well, which means be of good health, but you don't necessarily need to be a triathlete, and be of good character, but you don't have to be a saint. So we have the green list options, straight to residence or work to residence. So that's two of the five. Then we have a points-based skilled migrant category. So if your job is not on the green list, but you are still skilled, there is a points-based system that allows you to qualify. And that covers a very, very large selection of jobs. So anyone from, from a secretary all the way through to an astronaut and back again. The number of occupations that are on that particular pathway is pretty big. So you don't have to be on the green list to secure residence. It helps. But if you're in a skilled occupation, and can meet the points criteria, which we'll look at in a minute, then you do also have a pathway to residence. And then finally, we have the transport and care workforce sector. So that's the last two of the five. The transport sector pathway has been closed. Essentially, it was for truck and bus drivers, where we had a really big shortage of those in the post-COVID environment. But the people who can come through on that now, essentially, you can't come through on the temporary visa anymore, and the resident visa category exists only to finalise those who are already here. Care workforce sector is still open, and that is for people coming to work in the care sector. So that is nursing homes, elderly support, aged care, disability care, and so forth. It has very specific qualification and salary requirements attached to it, and there's a 2-year pathway to residence. For our discussion, when we move on to the next slides, we're going to focus on the top three there. So the green list, straight to residence and work to residence, and then the points-based skilled migrant category as well. If you're not in the skills list, but you are looking at investing here or buying a business, we have very specific investment and business visa options. Our investor category has essentially two parts to it, or two options within it. One is investing 5 million New Zealand dollars for a period of 3 years, and the other one is investing 10 million New Zealand dollars for a period of 5 years. And you might be wondering, if I'm investing less, why am I investing for a shorter period? And if I'm investing a whole lot more, why is it 5 years and not 3? And that is because when you invest the 5 million, you're putting them into very active, what we call direct investments, which have a higher risk attached. And if you're investing the 10 million, you can put them into much lower risk investments, which is why we make you invest for 5 years. It's a pathway to residence for those that have the money, and has very little other requirements, no age cap, minimal or no English language requirement, and no business experience. You've got to prove that the money is yours and you didn't rob a bank to get it. And then there are specific requirements around where you invest. We also have a pathway for those looking to establish a business in New Zealand. So if you're looking to be an entrepreneur and either establish a business or maybe buy an existing business, that is an option, but it is a very, very difficult option. And I often try and sway people away from it. If I think they will qualify under any other category, particularly the skilled category, that is the path I will suggest. And I would recommend them away from the entrepreneur category, simply because it is very discretionary. Immigration has their own kind of, view as to what makes a successful business. And you have to set the business up and run it successfully for 2 years. And then, unless you do that absolutely by the book and according to the business plan that you presented initially, your residence will fail. So it has a high risk attached to it. But if you had a really viable, genuine business and you didn't really qualify under any other option and you were keen, it is something we can explore. And then finally, family-based visas. So we have options for parents. And many of you will be thinking about, what do I do with mum and dad when I've made the move? Because I'd like them to follow me. And we have two options. We have a ballot-style lottery system, where once you've been in New Zealand for 3 years, you can sponsor your parents provided you meet a certain income threshold. And then we have a parent retirement category as well, which has no 3-year stand down. So if you get residence today, your parents could apply tomorrow, but they have to invest $1 million here, have $500,000 on top of that for settlement, and an annual income of $60,000 a year. Much faster pathway to residence, but obviously with a lot more caveats attached to it. We also have visas for, and these include temporary and resident visas for partners. So if you have a New Zealand partner and you're wanting to join them here, and that New Zealander is a citizen or a resident visa holder, then you can qualify based on partnership. And we also have finally a category for dependent children. We don't assist a lot of dependent children because normally they are included in the original residence application. And on that point, and it's a really good point to make, for residents, dependent children can be included up until the age of 25, provided they are dependent, single, and have no children of their own. For temporary visas, the age threshold for dependent children is lower. It's 20. So if you're coming here and you need to work for a while first before you end up with residence, you need to factor in what will happen to your older children and how they might sort of fit into the equation, particularly if they're around that sort of 16, 17 years of age, because they might time out effectively on the temporary visa, but still be eligible to be included in residence, and it's what you do with them in the between that we have to consider. So that's kind of a really brief outline of both the temporary visas and the resident visa options that we have. Our business also deals a lot with what we call visa intervention, and that is where people have gone off the rails. They may have made a mistake, they may have been poorly mistreated by the system, their application may not have been decided properly, and we can become involved in things such as appealing applications, if you become liable to be deported, if we need to seek a resolution to your application, Section 61s, which are if you are in New Zealand unlawfully. And of course, if you worked with us, that would never happen, but some people do end up unlawful for various reasons, and we can assist them out of that with a Section 61, or where we need to approach the minister. And our system is one where the Minister of Immigration has absolute unfettered discretion to grant a visa to anyone for any purpose at any time. And there are situations and circumstances where we might need to approach the minister to grant a visa or to make an exception for someone who we think is really, really qualified. A very common way of doing that, and one that we're looking at the moment for someone, is where they're too old. So we have someone who's a highly qualified medical professional, tons of experience, there's no one like them in New Zealand, and we are seeking a request from the minister to waive the age requirement because they are actually 60 years of age. So there are certain cases and situations where we can seek out some special treatment, but that's pretty rare. So our business, we deal with all of that stuff, and our role, or what we do, is very much guide you through the process. But the starting point is making sure you qualify. That's really what this is all about. And that's what the seminar is all about. It's giving people, hopefully, a view as to where they might fit in this whole system. And for most of you, that will be in the skilled migrant path. And that's what we're going to look at now. So we're going to start with the green list, and that's those two pathways, the straight to residence option or the work to residence option. And then we're going to talk about the points-based system next. So the green list, we'll call it the green list. The green list skilled migrant pathway was only introduced a couple of years ago, or 2.5 years ago, in 2022, when the borders reopened. So we had 2.5 years of border closures. We didn't bring in a lot of migrants, and during that time, the government reinvented our immigration system. We used to have a pathway or a skilled migrant category, just one category, that had about 16 different points factors. It was very confusing, and mostly confusing for immigration officers trying to process cases. So over that COVID period where the borders were shut, we had some time to rethink it, and we came up with two different options, and the green list was a big part of that. So the green list, and the government in New Zealand has always had a list of some description. We've always tried to recognise occupations that are in demand, and the green list essentially does that. So, and you can view the green list on my website or on immigration's website. It's publicly available, but what you'll see is that it is a list of jobs split into two groups. So there is a tier 1 group and a tier 2 group. And each occupation has two columns next to it, which specify what that occupation requires. So what you need to have if you have a job on the green list. And often that is things like having a particular qualification, or having a certain level of income, so earning a certain salary, or maybe being registered in New Zealand. And the two parts of the list, so the tier one occupations, which tends to be things like IT professionals, engineers, health professionals, quite specialist jobs, basically. Jobs that have either a degree level qualification attached, or you need to be registered in New Zealand, so a teacher, or a doctor, or a dentist, and come with a good level of skill. Those tier one occupations have a direct straight to residence path. That means if you secure a job offer here in New Zealand with an accredited employer and you meet the requirements of the green list and you have a job on that green list, tier one, you can skip temporary visas, go directly for residence, and it will take between 6 to 8 weeks for most applications if they're well prepared and have all the documents to be processed. And it's pretty quick. In fact, that's probably one of the quickest resident visa issuing processes globally. Most countries take months, if not years, to consider a residence visa. New Zealand will do it in under 2 months. Things can slow that down if there are medical issues that need to be reviewed or documents that need to be verified. There are a number of things that might slow that process down, but generally, for a good quality tier one straight to residence, you're looking at under 2 months. So the really important part is to make sure that you're prepared for that application, you've done your homework, and that's our first step with a client is to do all that document preparation, get everything ready, then find the job. And obviously that might entail coming to New Zealand. But once you've locked in the job, then you're applying for residence really quickly and hopefully securing that really quickly. And once that resident visa is issued, you are free to do what you want. You basically have the run of the country. You're here permanently. You get healthcare. You get access to education, free education for your children, obviously. And that also applies when you're on a work visa. You get healthcare and education on the work visa as well. But residence gives you the right to be here permanently. You can work in any job you like. You'll usually start with the job that got you the visa in the first place, but you might move around after that and you're free to do so. And that resident visa application includes yourself, your partner, your spouse, and your dependent children. So that's the straight to residence option. But then we have another one, which is tier two of the list. So if you scroll down the list, you'll come to the bottom, which has a different group of occupations. And they are not on a straight to residence path, but they're on a work to residence path. And that essentially means if you've got a job in one of those occupations, they tend to be trade occupations, mechanics, plumbers, electricians, that sort of thing. If you secure a job in one of those occupations, your first step is to secure a work visa, and that will be valid for 5 years. And then after working in that occupation and meeting the requirements of that list, which is usually being registered, maybe having a specific trade qualification or earning a certain amount of money, after 2 years, you then qualify for residence. There is no points-based system there. It's literally just work in that job in New Zealand for that 2 years, meet the list requirements, and you will be processed for residence, which will take about 2 or 3 months, so reasonably quick. Probably the most important part of this green list is that people tend to focus only on the job. So they say, okay, well, I'm an engineer, so I'm on the list and I've got a job in New Zealand as an engineer. Away I go. Unfortunately, they forget that the list has requirements for the job. So for an engineer, they have to have a very specific kind of qualification, not just any degree, but a particular kind of degree that we will recognise under our engineering accord. So each occupation on the list has those kinds of requirements, and you need to make sure you meet those before you consider this as a pathway. But if you do meet those, it's a very, very good pathway. And gives people residence directly. It's fast, it's reasonably simple in terms of what you have to prepare, and it is gives you the residence straight away, which is a massive advantage. So that is the green list. So tier one, straight to residence, tier two, work to residence. And our first step with most applicants when we're doing a consultation is to identify where do you fit and do you qualify on that list? And if you do, what does the job market look like for you? All right, so, and remember, any questions, pop them in the chat. There's a couple coming through now. And now we're going to dive into the points-based system, which is the other option if you're not on the green list. So you might still be skilled, and a good example, one that I use often, is accountant. So if you're an accountant and you've got a degree, it's a skilled job. And New Zealand will want that. There'll be employers here who want good quality skilled accountants, but they're not on the green list. So how does that work? Well, that's where the points-based system picks up all the people who don't appear on the list, but who are skilled. And we measure that skill in 3 different ways. And then we have a point system to determine how quickly you will get residence through that process. So on the screen, hopefully you'll see there is a table, two tables there. The big table has 3 columns. The small one just has the 1 column. Well, it's kind of 2, but really 1. And what you do is you start with the big table, and then you look at whether or not you need to top up the points from the small table. You need a total of 6 points under this system to qualify. And if we start with the big table, and let's say, as a good example, you are an electrician. So an electrician would generally require 4 years of trade-based training, maybe a trade test certificate or equivalent overseas qualification. And so they're going to be able to secure 4 points based on that first column, New Zealand registration. That 4 points means they're 2 points away. So then we look at the small column, or small table, I should say, and 2 years of work experience here will give you that 2 points. So that person is going to be on a work to residence path, essentially. Their skill gives them 4 points. Their work experience here gives them 2 points. That gets them the total of 6. So that person would secure the job offer, come to New Zealand, work for 2 years, and then apply for residence based on their points. And then if we looked at someone like a doctor who requires at least 6 years, if not more, training, they would qualify for 6 points straight away just based on that first column in the big table. They don't need the work experience in New Zealand. They've already got the 6 points. And so with a job offer and all the other requirements they need to meet, they would then qualify for residence directly. No work visa needed, kind of like the green list, but based on points. And then so if you're not someone who needs to be registered, so you're not a doctor or a teacher or a nurse, but you have a degree, we then look at the same sort of thing. So we might look at the middle column in that big table and say, well, what degree do you have? And if you have a bachelor's degree, that's kind of the starting point, that's 3 points. So the accountant is a really good example. Coming back to that, if you've got your bachelor's degree in accounting, and that gives you 3 points, then you look at the little table, I need 3 years of experience. So that individual is going to be on a 3-year work their way to residence process. And then the final column in that big table is, before I get to that, on the qualifications, similarly to the doctor, if you had a PhD, that gives you the 6 points straight away. And here's the slightly weird bit. If you had a PhD in, let me say, English literature, but you had worked your entire life as a cafe manager, and you came to New Zealand and got a job as a cafe manager, you would qualify for 6 points. Even though your PhD has nothing to do with managing a cafe, you still get those 6 points. So with that job, your PhD, the cafe manager is on a straight to residence path. They can apply directly. The degree qualified 10-year experience accountant earning probably twice as much money is on a 3-year pathway to residence. So the system isn't perfect, excuse me, for those reasons, because it tends to recognize qualifications as being quite important. And in my view, they're not always that important. So understanding where you might fit and how many points you might get is a really, really important first step. But what if you don't have a registered occupation and you don't have a qualification? You can still potentially qualify. And that is the final column there, which is based on the income you earn in New Zealand. So if your New Zealand job offer pays a certain amount of money, and it's all based on the median wage here, then you secure points based on that. So if you don't have a trade degree, any qualification at all, but you've got lots of good experience, and you could earn a good amount of money here, around about the $98,000 a year, that will give you 3 points. So working in a job at that salary for 3 years in New Zealand will get you to the 6. If you earn twice the median, that's quite a bit more. That's about 130 thereabouts. That's going to give you 4 points, and therefore 2 years of work here will qualify you. If you earn 3 times the median, so you're up at around about the $200 and something thousand mark, that's going to get you 6 points straight away. So I guess the main message here with the points-based system is that there are different options based on your skills and what you're bringing to the table. And some people might have a combination. They might have a PhD and be a doctor, so they can pick and choose. The other, I guess, slightly tricky part is that all of this, particularly this points-based system, is being reviewed. and we're likely to see some changes in the near future. The changes are potentially going to make it a bit easier for those in the trades who don't always have a degree, and maybe don't even have a diploma, but are still really valuable skills. And it's likely that what will happen is the number of years of experience you might need is going to change, and for the better. So change is inevitable with our skilled migrant category. It's adjusting to the labour market, to the economy, to what the country needs. So it's always being revised and tweaked and altered. But generally, the same basic idea exists. You need to get a skilled job. You need to be bringing some skills with you, under 56 years of age, healthy, no convictions, and speak English. Generally, if you fit into that bubble, then you're going to qualify in some way, shape, or form to make the move. All right, and so we've got to about 45 minutes and counting. So I just want to, I guess, kind of get to the wrapping up stage. So again, if you do have questions, please pop them in. There's 3 in there at the moment, so that will make it a very short Q&A for me, which is good, because I have a whole day of work ahead of me. But please do pop those questions in there before we wind up. I guess the way I like to end these sessions is to think a little bit more about not just the visa process, because it is obviously that's really important, and most of you will be very focused on that, and I don't blame you. But you also need to think about what goes beyond that in terms of making a move, because moving to another country it's a pretty big deal. I mean, next to buying your first home or having your first child, moving overseas permanently will be one of the biggest things you ever do. So I guess the key is to understanding how a good move works. And a good move works by being realistic, by understanding, as I said at the very beginning, that it is challenging and that it will be a process, and that process will be frustrating at times. There'll be times where you think, oh, maybe we shouldn't have done this, and that's normal. You will have to adjust to the way of life in New Zealand. It's pretty easy to do that, but you do need to sort of think about how all of those things work, and also your families. Many of you will be moving with families, and how that might impact on the children and so forth. And one of the big things I do recommend to clients is that you involve your children, you involve the family in the process as much as you can, because kids are pretty smart and they work stuff out. So the more involved they are in the planning and the preparation, the more exciting it becomes, and the more of an adventure it can be. But I have sort of, I guess, come up with 4 golden rules, if you will, or 4 bits of advice that I give people, which mirrors the way we work with our clients. And the number 1 is be prepared. From the start to the very end, being prepared is crucial, whilst also understanding there will be lots of surprises along the way. So you can have a plan, and we love having a plan, and we give our clients a plan. But we also say that plan might actually change a few times as we move along, because there are certain things that are a little bit unpredictable. A great example of that is I have people often say, well, I want to move to New Zealand and I want to live in Christchurch because that's where we had our honeymoon. We've been there many times. We love the mountains. We love being in the south. So that's great. But what happens if you get a job in Auckland? What happens if the right job, the perfect job is in Auckland? So being flexible about where you end up is really important, and being able to adjust as things happen, because you don't always know where that job might be. And ultimately, once you're here and you've got your visas and you can move around the country, well, then you can live wherever you like. But the starting point is be prepared to be flexible. Second one is enjoy the adventure. It is a process. It's challenging. It's frustrating. It can be costly. There's a lot involved in it, but enjoy it as much as you can. You know, take each day as it comes. Work through the process methodically. Be prepared, but be prepared to change and adapt and adjust. Third thing is take the advice. Be surprised how many clients I bring on board who then still rely or still look to things like Facebook and chat groups, and there's so many of them for the advice. And my advice is ignore it. My job is to give you the advice you need, not what you want to hear, but what you need to know. And so sometimes that might not be the nicest thing in the world to hear, but I'm telling it to you because you need to understand it. And I often say to clients, I say to all my clients actually, you like me at the start, you'll love me at the end, but in the middle, you might not be that happy. because I'm paid to tell you what to do. And sometimes that can be uncomfortable, particularly if I think a client is not following the advice or going off track a bit, then I will push them to make that work. And then finally, again, it sort of mirrors the first one, be prepared for change. Visa process does change, rules change. We have new policies popping up, we have adjustments to policies, but over the 20 plus years that I've been doing this, the same kinds of migrants qualify. The people with the same kinds of backgrounds who can bring the same degree of skill and I guess benefit to the country are the ones that make it through. And the biggest change we ever had was when we adjusted our skilled migrant category many years back. Massive change in the way the points were marked and structured. And at that point, we had around about 240 clients in that middle of that process. And when that change occurred, only 3 of them didn't qualify. And they were already very close to not qualifying anyway. So they were on the sort of higher risk category. All the others still qualified. Change in process, but still could make it work. So be prepared for change. That's how this process can work. And that's very much what we do. We have a 4-step process that we work through with people, which is essentially plan and prepare, which is all the documents and the admin and the getting you ready for it. Excuse me. Then the job search, which we assist with. We're not recruiters, so I don't find jobs for people, but I help with CVs, cover letters. It's all common sense stuff that we do. Third is the temporary visas if you need them. And then the 4th is residence. So those are our 4 steps to get to the end goal, which is having you living and working and settling in New Zealand. And then finally, word to the wise, nobody can convince you to make the move. It's got to be your decision. You'll talk to friends, you'll talk to family, you'll talk to people who'll say, yes, come to New Zealand, it's wonderful, make the move, it'll be the best thing you ever do. Reality is, only you can decide that. And you'll know, and I call it the light bulb moment, where you'll have done the research, you'll have gone to these seminars, you'll have spoken to someone like me, and you will wake up one day and say, yep, we're going to do it. And if you don't have that, then don't do it. It's a simple fact. It's a bit of a gut feel, it's a bit of a leap of faith, but you've got to be convinced and you've got to be committed to it. That's my advice, having done this for so long and having moved literally thousands of people. I've learned a few things along the way, and that's how I would summarize it for you. We're sort of at the end of the session, and if you are interested in moving ahead or just finding out more in terms of your specific eligibility and what you can do in this process, then obviously we can consult with you and you can book that with myself or one of the team, depending on availability. We do tend to book up quite quickly. What we tend to do in that situation is ask you to do a more detailed questionnaire. Some of you might have already done that. We then have a good look at everything before we meet with you. So in our heads, we've already worked out the plan. We then meet with you, ask a few questions, clarify a few things, but we spend the bulk of that time talking about the process and your move, not asking you the questions we need to be able to do that. We do all that up front. We do those sessions via Zoom or Teams, and at the end of the seminar, I'll send everybody an email on how to book that in. So that sort of brings us to the Q&A session. I've got a few questions here, which I will answer. If you've got a question, pop it in now before I close that off, and then we wrap it up for the day. I know where some of you are getting a bit late, and where I am is very early, but I've got a day ahead of me, and you've got some sleep. All right, so we'll start off with the first question. Any chance we can cover the health requirements, health check, and how that affects dependents? Basically, if a dependent has health issue, what would make that issue a disqualifying factor? That's a really good question. It's a very difficult question to answer in a simple way, but I'm going to try. So New Zealand does have health screening requirements for all visas, and they're actually different. So the level of screening done for a temporary visa is different to that for residents. For a temporary visa, immigration is looking at what is the likelihood you'll cost the system, the public healthcare system, money or stress or tie up resources over the life of the visa. So if it's a 1-year visa, what is the likelihood of that 1 year you needing to need treatment? For residents, we're looking at your lifetime. So the threshold is a lot higher. It's hard to give you exact line in the sand because medical situations are never black and white. You could have a very serious condition that's well managed that may not actually cost the system much money. But the simplest way to answer it is it's all about cost. So if you have a significant medical condition that requires hospitalization, regular treatment and follow-ups, or expensive medication, that is potentially going to be something that stops you. For residents, we have ways of arguing a medical waiver where if the benefit of approving your application outweighs the medical issue, we can go through that process as well. But if it's a really significant condition, and that includes things like mental health, special education services as well, that can knock you out of the process. So what we tend to do is when we do our assessments for people, we look very carefully, we ask questions about medical, and we want to know straight away whether that issue is going to be an issue and or can we deal with it. And we'll give you a very upfront answer. If we think it's not going to work, we'll tell you that. But if we think that there could be the chance to argue the case, or maybe it actually isn't that big an issue, we'll let you know. So sorry, I can't give you a line in the sand for health, but I guess the answer there is if your medical condition is manageable, not that significant, and you deal with it, for example, diabetes, well managed is fine, but cancer is not fine, if that gives you a bit of a comparison. Second question, do you help someone secure work visa that potentially gets the person PR? Yes. Yes, that's what we do. And that is a big part of the work that we do is that multiple visa process that I talked about at the beginning. So people coming here as a visitor to find work, then getting the job, transitioning to a work visa, working for a period of time, getting the points they need, then going on to residence. So yes, we manage that whole process from start to finish. People often say, oh, look, I'll come back to you when I've got the job offer. My advice is that's too late because by that stage, the employer is desperate for you to apply. You might not have all the documents prepared and everything slows down. So my advice is if you're going to do it, then we start right at the very beginning by getting you prepared, getting you ready, and then helping you to make the move. All right, last question. While earning the 6 points to secure residency in a job, can you also invest in a separate business as a second income? That's a really interesting question and also quite difficult to answer, but I will try and answer that. If you're on a work visa, the work visa, which is allowing you to build up the experience to get the points you need, the work visa is very specific and says, thou shalt work for company A in the role of engineer and in the location of Auckland. And because it's specific, it does not then allow you to do other work. So you could not start a separate business because that would constitute self-employment and your visa doesn't entitle you to do that. You could invest in a business as long as you don't invest as a majority shareholder earning too much money and being too involved. But if you invested a small amount into a business as a kind of passive investment where you're receiving a dividend or return, that's okay. So it's all about what that investment entails. If it entails you working in the business, and then that's unfortunately not going to work. But if you are just making a passive investment and investing as an investor, then that could potentially work. Once you've got residence, you're free to do whatever you wish, no problem at all. So hopefully that answered that question. And there is one that's popped up quickly, and someone's had to drop lunch off at work for someone, so we'll let them go. But the last question here, and then we'll wrap up, is registration, e.g. as a social worker, compulsory before you start applying for a visa? For certain occupations, yes, it is. So if you're a teacher, for example, you can't actually be employed as a teacher unless you're registered. So having registration is absolutely crucial. Some occupations, and this includes social work and counselling, registration is by membership, which means that you should become registered because it's useful. You could secure a work visa for that job even without registration, but to qualify for residence, you would need to get registration. So the registration isn't by law, so you can work in that occupation without being registered, but immigration only wants those who are registered to qualify for a visa. So it's very occupation specific. The vast majority of those registrable occupations, however, do need to have that registration beforehand. And that's something we would do before you start looking for jobs directly, because otherwise you're probably wasting your time. Most employers are not really going to take you seriously unless you do have that registration in place. So that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time and for attending. And I know timeframes are a bit tricky, but as I said, if you are interested in pursuing this further and would like to book in a consultation or a meeting with me or the team, just get in touch and we can set that up for you. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you all, and we'll hopefully hear from you at some stage. Take care.